mixed around. Know that kids who aren't in programs, either in the summer or after school, may not have access to healthy food. They'll have lunch at 11 or so during the school day and not have access, perhaps, to healthy food until they come back for free breakfast the next morning at the school. So after-school programs will serve an after-school snack. They'll serve a meal, a full meal on site. So it's a big part. We provide training, coaching. We're working with programs that work with children as young as 5 and as old as 26. We'll do communities of practice around social emotional learning and trauma-informed practice. We'll go in and do staff trainings. We'll help with program quality evaluations. You'll see kind of our mix of staff in the green. It's a really strong team, and part of what makes us strong is that everything we do is in partnership with others. So we have a formal 9 to 26 coalition, which is anyone in the state who's working with youth ages 9 to 26. We have close partnerships like we do with Sarah at the Department of Health. And we have collaborators that we're working with out locally. So Restorative Justice is a big partner right now with after-school programs in communities. Sarah hit on this. I would say what we're doing in the after-school field, the third space, Vermont Afterschool, really is primary prevention. It's upstream, and it's for all kids. So yes, we pay attention to at-risk or low income, and that data blog is all about sort of digging into that data to see who do we need to reach more and better and so forth. But we have a very strong belief that what is good for the wealthiest kids who have access to violin and private coaches and robotics camps at Harvard in the summer, right, is really good for all our kids, and that we really need to equalize that playing field. And that by offering those opportunities, we really have these 4 buzzwords about every young person in Vermont being able to be active, engaged, connected, and heard. And those are the things that the research show, and that's really getting at your sense of belonging, right? So if every young person in Vermont went to school, positive climate, got out of school, had things, passions they could explore, interests they could do, positive peer groups, physical activity, out in nature, right, opportunities to make decisions, really felt like they belonged, and someone who was checking in, cared about them, how much better off would we be, and where would we be on prevention, right? Where would we be on drug use and opioids and obesity and all those other things? We'd be so much further along. The other thing about after school is the space is really cool. I was actually in New Orleans yesterday at this conference, and there was a state superintendent from Illinois who was speaking. And what he said was the school day, this is all grant makers for education, so with all these foundations that are funding education. And what he said was the school day is really about teaching, right? It's about handing that knowledge, it's about teaching. The after school space, that third space, is about learning, right? It's flipped. So we have a lot of flexibility. We can have multi-age groups. We can go off-site. I would say every moment in an after-school program is a teachable moment, right? So when you and I, we're working on our robot, and our robot fails, and I'm really frustrated because I think you did something wrong, and you're really frustrated because you think I did something wrong, that's social emotional learning. How do we handle that conflict? And it's in that moment, right? Or when we're hiking up as a group, hiking up some mountain in Vermont, right? All that great physical activity, and someone's falling behind. How we help, right? How we do our own grit and perseverance to get to the top of the mountain, but how we help that one, our peer who's behind. Like, how do we handle that, right? So every moment can be this teachable moment, and it's not just for the high flyers and the shiners that are at the front of the classroom, right? But it's for every young person in that setting. So it's a really amazing space. And when we talk about youth belonging and this participatory budgeting and youth engagement, it's given us a whole other way to sort of explore and support that level of engagement. So this sort of journey, I would say about 3.5 years ago, some of us had been partnering for a lot of years. You know how this is, right? You go to a meeting and it's the same people at the meeting, right? And then you go to the next meeting and it's the same people at that meeting. And felt like we were doing really good work, but we also were just a little stuck, like kind of having the same conversations and running up against the same barriers, and frankly kind of accepting them that, oh, that's the barrier, So some of this came out of this need to sort of like, oh man, let's just look at something different. So we've been doing that. It started with Finland, it's expanded to Iceland, and the research they're doing on youth risk and protective factors with whole society change. It's Wisconsin on their trauma-informed stuff. Actually, my colleague in Wisconsin who runs their out-of-school time network sits at a hospital. It's a hospital that's taken on this out-of-school time space. So looking at that, so wherever we can find new ideas. But the idea we're going to focus on today really is this Finland idea. I have been able to go twice to Finland. I know some of you were there when Dr. Lasse Sarala came here last spring. He spoke all over the state to hundreds of people about what they're doing in Finland. And just last week, we had 2 visitors from Helsinki. It was the head of the Helsinki Youth Council, Vivian Lundqvist, 15 years old, who we invited and paid to come here and work with our youth, and Johanna Luukkonen, who is one of the youth workers in the city of Helsinki who's supporting the participatory budgeting process. So these connections are starting to go pretty deep between us and Finland. But for those of you who didn't hear about that call, just a brief recap of what we saw, Finland has this strong emphasis on youth engagement and youth participation. Those active, engaged, connected, and heard I talked about, they're living and breathing it. They have a youth law that says that youth have the right to advise on anything that affects them. It's at the federal level, it's at the municipal level, right? So municipal governments have to have youth councils. They can't pass a bill or move forward on something unless they have gotten youth voice in some way. In Finland, they define youth as 9 to 29. A lot of the youth council work focuses on 13 to 17 in that age group. They have youth centers in every neighborhood that are funded by the government that are open from 12 to 9. They're full, you'll see, of like complete band setups. It's not just the pool tables that we're used to seeing or a gaming station or a foosball table. It is like music studios, digital music studios, pottery studios, jewelry making, because one of their national indicators for youth is that every young person in Finland will have a hobby. And that's kind of their getting at their belonging, right? So, and self-identity, right? So if I have a hobby, I have something I can define myself by, that I'm interested in. I've got self-efficacy to figure out, okay, when's my band going to meet, or when is the play practice? I've got adult role models. I've got a sense of community. So they layer a lot in there. Also within the city of Helsinki itself, they have another indicator that is every young person will be involved in positive social change, through a political process. So they have this underpinning youth law. They have these youth councils at every level. The youth councils, so we could do that, but one of the flips that's really authentic and true there is that the youth councils actually have power. They actually have say, and decision makers have to listen to them. So the Helsinki Youth Council meets with the mayor and the deputy mayors regularly. There are 4 divisions within the city of Helsinki, and they have 3 seats on each division with the adults. They're at the table. They just won that recently. Vivian was very proud of that. They have a budget of 200,000 euro that they oversee. And they're when you talk to Vivian or these are some of the other youth council members, they're very sophisticated in their understanding of participatory processes, their understanding of democracy. They're not a socialist nation, they're a capitalist nation, but they play high level on participation and participatory democracy. So this participatory budgeting is actually opening up the money, opening up the decisions to the young people to decide what are we going to do with it. It's not only youth suggesting ideas that then get funded as grants, which is what we've been working on in the Finland model. It's youth looking at how are the youth workers' time going to be spent over the next year. So they spend a year of strategic planning, and all that feedback comes back into each district, and the districts sit down with the youth and like, okay, well, they're going to be offering more of this, and you want to do a bunch of climate change stuff, so that they invest not only the dollars, but also the youth workers' time. A quick note on youth workers. This is a field in Finland. They have bachelor's, master's, and PhDs in youth work. They are experts in young people. That is what they are. It's about young people's culture, living conditions, transitions, and development. And they recognize this period of being young as being a really special, unique, and important time in human development. And they're not about making the young people into mini adults. They're about, no, there's something about special about the way you communicate and meet and make decisions, and our society can benefit from that. Some of the things that we brought back from Finland is the idea of youth rights. So we held a youth rights summit, and we have a copy of the youth rights that were developed by our young people, ages 9 to 22. Every word, every right is directly from the young people. We only fix typos. So anything you see in there is right. There were some ninth graders doing the scribing. So there's a few things that were a little quirky, but that was the only thing we changed. The 9 to 26 coalition I mentioned, that is a broad statewide coalition that meets monthly. It's mental health professionals, higher ed, restorative justice, youth in transition, after school all together. On the back of that, we've been working on new framing. Oh, it's not on the back of that one. We have another one that works on new framing around youth. Just the idea that when we looked at how youth are perceived in Vermont, they don't really have a strong voice, or it's like, yay, look how cute they are, but then we're going to go make our own decisions, or we don't want youth in downtown, we don't want a teen center because they kind of scare us because they're hanging out by the library and that makes me nervous, or something like that. So the framing's all around youth make a better Vermont. Youth want and need what we all want and need, and really trying to work broad-based across the state with any individual we encounter to sort of like change that message and that framing. And then working with youth councils, youth voice community practice, and the Y4Y grants. So with that, I'm going to switch it over to Sam to talk about the Y4Y grant.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. So as Holly said, the Y4Y grants were part of this strategy that we've been getting based on partially on this model from Finland. And I'm actually going to show, to start, a video that we worked with a videographer from southern part of the state to do, and it's kind of a quick summary of the Y4Y grants from last year, so that'll kind of give you an overview, and then I'll fill in some of the gaps. So hopefully this works.
Welcome to the Vermont Youth Grant Program, a mini grant competition designed by you and for Vermontians. Created by a teen youth council in 2018, the application was open to any Vermonter ages 9 to 22. The idea is flooding in, with 44 proposals submitted that all focus on furthering the youth range. From there, young people from every Vermont county voted to select the top 14 projects that would receive funding. Here's a few of the 2019 Youth Creative Grant recipients to give you an idea of what happens when young people get the support they need to make their ideas happen.
Our project is called Cultural Diversity Day, and it was a day where we brought different people representing different cultures in, students and faculty, in workshops, and we wanted the entire school to be involved.
I definitely feel empowered that when we got the email and that we were accepted, I was very happy when I saw students laughing, fun, and actually being engaged.
In Vermont, we really intend to be in our own bubble. Having those kind of open sessions is something we've been working towards at U32, and that was something we felt that we really wanted to be part of. To help that local school, I think that was great.
Our project is building a trail. We're pretty much done. It's really rewarding. Our goal is just to build a community trail for everyone. First, we want people to do that. Uphill, downhill, rock, So it's fun for like an expert, but a beginner rider can also have for everyone to ride. We're all from separate schools. Both of our robotics teams are not school affiliated, so we're always looking for grants and opportunities. They both drive us around, and that's about it. It's all food. We went to San Diego for the international open competition. A lot of our kids have not left Vermont. It's a huge deal to do that. And it was amazing. This grant is such a great opportunity. This is paid for the trip and to find us been in this program for 6 years. I was painfully shocked before I came. I didn't like to talk to people. I didn't know how to talk to them. Now I'm really coming to my own. And I think this program really helps kids think beyond their age.
Oh yes, we can. Sarah's going to hand out. So this is all of the different projects that came in. So I'll talk a little bit more, but they mentioned all the 44 projects that were proposed. So that's a list of all the different projects, and then the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that ended up receiving funding. So let's see. All right. So it touched on it briefly in the video, but the main impetus really for the Y4Y grants was in 2017, the Youth Declaration of Rights Summit happened, and it's an amazing document. It really outlines some awesome specifics and some general goals that the youth wanted to see, but we wanted to not just have it be a document that was just sitting there and not really being acted upon. So we decided to start this process of creating a statewide youth council to create this participatory budgeting process. So we worked with after-school programs, youth centers to recruit young people to be on what essentially became a planning committee to create the beginnings of the process. They eventually identified we should have a summit where we get even more youth together. So we ended up getting, how many was it? 22 youth together at Lake Maury. And there's a picture, that's us working there at Lake Maury in the back, working through who should be involved in the process, how much should each grant be, should we do lots of little grants or do big grants? It was $25,000 total, so we were saying we could do, 3 big grants, we could do lots of small grants, what ages should it be open to, that sort of thing. And so what they ended up deciding was it could be anywhere from $100 up to $3,000 that youth could apply for, and then it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 if you're 21, and it was kind of a subtlety that we didn't mention in the video, but they were really aware of older youth wanting to be involved, but not wanting to make it super all the way up to like 26. So they compromised, and the young people there decided that it's 10 to 21, or if you're still in school, you can apply. So they came together, designed the grant process, and then they got together back in their hometowns and kind of spread the word that it was out there. They helped us do outreach and figure out what was out there. So through all that outreach and casting a really wide net, beyond just having young people spread it around in their communities, we pushed it out to all of our networks. We also did a paid advertisement in Front Porch Forum, which actually one of the parts of the application said, "How did you hear about us?" And a lot of people said Front Porch Forum was how they found out about it. So that ended up working really well. And so if you look on the back of the Y4Y, the Youth Declaration of Rights sheet, which, I thought I had it. Thanks, Sarah. It has the eligibility of who could apply. So this was all decided, as I mentioned before, at that Lake Maury event. So it has to further one of the areas of the Youth Declaration of Rights. The lead applicant and at least half of those involved have to be between 10 and 21 or still enrolled in school. Applicants and project leaders must live in Vermont, and the project should benefit Vermont youth. Applicants can apply for any amount from $100 to $3,000, like I said. And it can go to non-youth-led organizations, such as a community or youth center, as long as the idea was thought up and will be carried out by youth. And then individuals could apply for funding, but we would encourage people to apply as groups. And so if you look, that graph there shows what So we had them identify at least one youth right that their project was tied towards. So there's a pretty even spread among all the different youth rights. And so it was kind of interesting to see that there were a lot of, if you look at the actual projects on this one, people were really aware of how their project could benefit youth and further some of those youth rights. So as we said before, we got 44 applications came in. They're all across the board. We ended up dividing them up into two different categories, from $100 to $1,500 and then $1,500 to $3,000. And yeah, this kind of word cloud shows some of I just basically put all of the applications into one of those word cloud generators. So it shows you kind of some of the themes that came out of it. And I really do encourage you to read through all of the different applications, because there's some really awesome ideas. Even the ones that ended up not getting funded are some really great ideas in there. And then you can see on the left the map of where all of the different applications were. We had a pretty good geographic spread. Obviously, the southwestern part of the state wasn't so good, but I mean, other than that, we covered most of the counties in the state as well. Once we got all the applications in, we had a voting round, which lasted a month. It was done via online form. Youth could vote once, and they were required to vote for 3 different projects in each of those 2 funding categories, the 100 to 1,500, 1,500 to 3,000. We wanted people not to just go on, vote once for theirs or their friends' projects. We wanted them to really read through all of them and spread their votes around a little bit. So we got 715 total votes from every county in Vermont, which was really impressive. We were happy with that. And then we ended up funding 14 projects in each of the 2 categories for a share of the $27,000. And then this past year, so that was all happening this winter, and then in the spring, we had the projects starting to be happening, like as you saw those 3 projects in the video. Some of them are still going on, like one of them, if you see, was for a ski trip, and obviously if you're getting funded in the spring, you can't have the ski trip until this winter. So that's one of and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges coming up. We realized that it's basically, so we're doing this again this year, so we're kind of overlapping, and that's making things a little tricky. But some of them are totally done. They have to do grant reports. They either have a finished final grant report that they've sent in, or if they aren't done, they have a progress report that was due in September. And so they're going on. Most of them have happened, or many of them have happened. This down here is one of the ones that wasn't featured in the video. It's the Never Have I Ever one, which is on the back side if you want to read a little bit more about it. But basically they wanted to give youth, and especially youth that are in foster care, opportunities to do things that they might not otherwise be able to do. So they did a bunch of kind of your classic summer camp things. They went camping, they went tubing, they went to the Bronx Zoo, and that's them getting their check. We had a award ceremony and kind of workshop about how are you actually going to pull this off with every grant recipient at the State House. So that's them receiving their check, and that's Caleb, who is one of the members of the planning committee, and yeah. Yes, definitely. height difference for sure. So, yeah. Make sure I got all my thing I wanted to touch on. So it was open to any young person. It was the voting eligibility was the same as the application requirement, so 9 to 21 or still in school. And again, one of the challenges was we didn't want to do it. There essentially wasn't a way to verify that somebody actually was between those ages, so there was an element of trust involved. But the voting, we also we knew that there would be some intrinsic motivation for anybody who applied, that they would want to get the word out for people to vote for their project. But we also did, again, do a big push through our networks. I think we might have done another push through Front Porch Forum for the voting as well. But yeah, so we had some extra helpers once we had some applicants in to help push it out, which was nice. So for this year, we are making some changes. One, we noticed there's a ton of interest in participatory budgeting from youth and adults. I think everybody is always super excited to see the page that has all of those different ideas on there. It's super exciting. I mean, when we had the online form taking applications, anytime I got an email saying there's a new one, I would click and, oh, I'm so excited to read. What do they want to do? And people just get really excited because it is what they want and what their dreams and ideas are to make Vermont better for them and their peers. So really exciting, really awesome. Some of the challenges, though, that came up for our statewide council, transportation, again, it's a perennial problem, but getting everybody physically together was really tricky. So we wanted it to be representative of everyone, all youth across the state, but it ended up being not super Chittenden County centric, but Chittenden, Washington, Addison County, we weren't truly representative in that sense, and that is one of the challenges. I think for the actual summit at Lake Maury, we were more representative, but for that planning committee, we weren't as much as we wanted to be. And one thing that was really tricky is balancing the spread of the impact with its depth. So we managed to impact so much of the state with this, but we realized that theoretically a voter up in Swanton could vote for a project down in Bennington, and they might go, I followed up with all the voters and said, here are the ones who won, thank you for voting, but they're not actually seeing the benefit of that project. So what we realized was we're still going to be statewide, but we're going to focus on certain communities and kind of disperse the projects among each community. So the way we're doing it this year is each community will have an identified partner. Many of them are after-school programs, some are youth centers, some are prevention coalitions, things like that. And they each get $3,000, and then they start their own youth council, which will create their own smaller participatory budgeting process, and they'll have all of their voters in their community. So it's basically distilling everything down to one community. So the voter will be able to see, oh, I voted for that project, and I get to see the impact of it and hopefully enjoy some of the benefits from it as well. So we have 7 different sites across the state with $3,000 each, and they get to create the process. They can decide what we're identifying as our community is just our youth center. We want to improve our youth center, and anybody who comes to this youth center can vote on what we should spend this $3,000 on, all the way to we have a multi-town school district, and we want to have anybody who's going to school in this multi-town school district be able to vote, so they can kind of see what they have the capacity to do and figure out what that impact could be. Yeah?
Are those lessons learned from who is the youth who have learned these lessons?
The youth and honestly, and us as well. I mean, I think the youth kind of definitely saw that I was getting feedback that, like, this was cool and, like, I really appreciate it, but they weren't feeling that impact. And also just the transportation challenges for sure. They would say, I really want to come, but I can't, that sort of thing. So the last thing I want to end on before we take some more questions is I have a quote from, Ginger, who was one of the young women from the very first project you saw in the video. They obviously did their project. It was a one-time event, so they did it at the end of the school year, and they've already submitted their final grant report. And I just wanted to read, it's a little long, but honestly, I think it really encapsulates a lot of what we do in this. So I'm going to read a little bit from her final report, and then we'll take some questions. So she says, I was amazed by how much two in this case, can do at a young age. As long as you put yourself out there and ask for help, there will always be somebody ready to help you in any way possible. I've learned it takes a lot of planning, communicating, long nights, organizing, and patience to plan a school event. Although it brought stress, this is the thing I'm most proud of doing in my high school career. As I start to graduate and move on from my time at U32, Diversity Day allowed me to give back to my community. I was able to educate roughly 800 students and faculty on stereotypes, Hollywood films, and misrepresented world cultures. I felt like I was able to make a difference, and I felt very proud that I'd been part of something my whole school could participate in. There were times when I had to make important decisions regarding sometimes related to money, grants, workshops, etc. Usually it is teachers or parents who make decisions for you. However, I felt I had the power to do whatever I chose because it was my event and I was planning. I gained many skills such as working independently, collaboratively, communicating with people via text, email, phone, learning how to budget myself, and becoming better at public speaking at faculty meetings. So, yeah, we'll take some questions if you've got any. Oh, yeah, I don't know.
The folks on the phone, you're unmuted.
Jeremy from School Health. Great message, really is very exciting to hear. So I'm thinking of how does this fit in the structure of, there are after-school activities that are in place historically, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, faith groups that do a lot of these similar things. Is there an opportunity for, if say a Girl Scout group was interested in the project and wanted to propose it, what are the criteria for participating or applying or not?
I mean, I would
allow
say
that kind of.
yeah, at least for this year, it's kind of up to each site. We're kind of leaving it up to them. We're encouraging them to kind of take something similar to what we did last year, where it should be a youth-driven idea. It should benefit youth. So they theoretically could apply. But also, I think one of the cool things about this is it's almost like a proof of concept where you can do this and you can trust young people to control money, and they won't say we're buying candy bars and video games. So honestly, I think part of this is just putting out there as a model that like Girl Scout troop or something, they could even take some of their budget and set aside $3,000 of it and say, Girl Scouts, what do you want to do? So it's not only they can participate in this, but they can also just take the model and use it on their own as well.
There's also a huge need for what,
Yeah.
no question about that.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of ripple effects off of this, so we're just showing, the 14 projects that were funded, but out of the coalition meeting, when Vivian and Johanna were here the other week, all the groups, because our idea is not to have one youth council in the state of Vermont, it's to have like 5,000 youth councils, right? And to have every young person being able to have a quote, like that quote from U32, right? And to have done that, right? And that's what they're doing in Helsinki, is every young person goes through this process. So there was a group there that's a restorative justice group that has a teen center, and came out of that conversation like, man, we could just sit down with the youth and open up our budget. Like, just to get their input on what they think about how we're spending money. So it doesn't have to be just this, but there's all those ripple effects. So a Girl Scout troop could do that, or a Girl Scout troop could propose an idea, or a Girl Scout troop could get in the project. Like, we're trying to, just like us, right, youth are going to engage in a lot of different ways. So what are a lot of different avenues to put out there? The other thing that we've added, because it came up in your slide as well, Sarah, is this focus on financial literacy. So Sam's been working a lot with the State Treasurer's Office on financial literacy at all levels, and this year we're adding a module for all of the youth councils for this year to really strengthen their understanding of money and budgeting, and when something comes in, is this realistic, and what do things cost, and so forth. So that's been added in as well.
I work in statistics, but I am a therapeutic foster parent, and kind of the hat I'm wearing in the audience today. Is it possible to kind of use the model at a household level? I'm not interested in doing a community project, but I am interested in helping the youth that I help out have better financial literacy, and I'm kind of thinking maybe we do a budget for the weekend and you can decide to go to the movies or restaurant or Are there any training resources about that?
We're developing, so we have, I can share the binder that we've shared with each site. And right now we have the 2 modules that they are working with, which is creating a youth council, and then all of the nuts and bolts of how to do PV. We're actually developing our financial literacy one right now. So I think the goal is to have this be transferable to organizations or other people. So I hadn't even honestly thought of going all the way down to household scale. So that's a really, I'll definitely keep that in mind when we're building it.
The old concept of family meeting, budgeting is part of family meeting.
Giving them hey, I'm going to spend $200 on our long weekend. You guys figure out how we can spend that.
Yeah. And also honestly showing here's all the other stuff that I'm spending money on, and this is why we can't do something this weekend or something like that too. And I mean, you want to be able to give them say, but also be able to say, here's why it's only this much, or something like
And
that.
then you have to be ready to actually listen.
Yeah.
Like, there is this transition of control, in here, and so, some of the ideas that came in, it's like, whoa, really? All right. But that's what got voted on, and so it's understanding that, and so that conversation, that education. There's another sort of subtle thing, with the Finland model that we're trying to keep, is that the Finland youth councils are not, I think they have 30 kids now in the youth council, they're not about, we're 30 kids in a room making all the decisions, and we represent every young person in Helsinki. Their charge is really to elevate youth voice. So as many kids as possible giving input and ideas, as many young people voting, as many young people. They have a bunch of different avenues. So we've also tried to do that. So our youth council, starting with even the planning group, was not about you're making all the decisions about how you're going to get more. So, you notice they went from a small planning group to, well, we got to have a summit then. Right, because we got to have more people involved in what the grant thing's going to look like. And now we want to diffuse it, right? So we want a lot of different youth councils so the decisions can be made locally. Like, you can watch that trend, and it's a really interesting shift.
I have a Finland question. I'm wondering about these youth centers and the connection to the school infrastructure, and what that looks like and how that translates to Vermont, given that I don't think by volume, in terms of physical buildings, we have a ton in Vermont, and we also have a lot of aging school infrastructure, and so I was just wondering how that plays out there.
It depends on the community. So in Helsinki, there's a lot of, they call them youth houses, that are scattered in the different neighborhoods, but I also went to towns where the youth center was part of a library, which was in a mall. So it's like, you got the mall, the library, and the youth center, and it was all integrated. So there were books of stacks, and then the foosball table, and, and the youth workers and the librarians working together. I also saw models where the youth center was part of the school. It was physically in the school, which was really cool, because then at lunch, the youth were going to the youth center, right? And you could see the different ages sort of go through there. After school, they were in there. The youth workers were actually being used as a resource, as experts in youth again, pushing into classrooms when teachers would have them come in if they had a difficult class that they needed some other thoughts on how to handle it, or a difficult, student, something going on with behaviors or in the family, right? It gave them an added resource. So it actually was a real strength, to have that integrated model. And it really depended on the resources in the community.
How are you addressing equity for, looking at Canaan area, where there's no dock there, and you talked about transportation. So how's that being addressed, or reaching out, different backgrounds and groups that aren't typically mainstream?
I would say there's kind of two parts. One, in terms of geographic equity, we're hoping that this model sticks and works well, and we can continue in future years. And kind of, we were pretty intentional in who we invited to apply to be a site. So we're going to try to, if we didn't get somebody from way up in the Northeast Kingdom, make sure we get a site that next year, that sort of thing. So in terms of site geography, we're thinking about being intentional about who's applying. In terms of youth from site to site, another thing that we realized in trying to do it across the whole state is we might know a person in each community that knows that community well, and they know the youth much better than we can. So in terms of recruiting, we can say, we were already going through these people and saying, can you get this person involved, like all the young people that involved in this big thing? But it's so much easier to just say, here's how to do that thing. I'll empower you to do it, and you make sure that you get all the youth and all the youth that should be there because they know their youth better than we do.
We do tend to work with organizations that are working with at-risk youth or vulnerable populations, or to sort of get a head start on some of that. And like Sam said, it's everything's relationships, right? So utilizing those local relationships has really helped.
How do you measure that? Equity or diversity? How do you measure who you're reaching?
The programs will tell us, who they're reaching, and they'll have the stats. So we don't have the student level demographics on their students, but they will have that. I will say the Youth Rights Summit was very geographically diverse and also culturally and demographically diverse. I mean, there were, when you look at some of those rights, like gun laws, there was a young man in camouflage from a rural Vermont hunting family, you know, having a deep conversation with some new Americans from the Winooski area, you know, about violence and guns and stuff like that. So, you know, in a humble way, I know we're not reaching everybody yet, but in a big thinking way, you know, that is the vision, that it's not just Vermont Afterschool and Department of Health doing this, but everybody's getting this, and this is that culture change across our state, that every young person is active, engaged, connected, and heard, right? And that the Girl Scouts have picked it up, and the Parks and Rec Department has picked it up, and I think that's how we're actually going to make that cultural change and create as many avenues as possible.
And one thing I didn't mention about this year's model that we did, so this picture actually is from Bethel a couple weeks ago. So all the different sites came together, and we did a training about here's what participatory budgeting is, start planning what you're doing, and then we're going to come together again in February to do some workshop on sharing your story and kind of putting it out there, and that's going to be at the State House, and they're going to actually practice by talking to their legislators about here's what we've been doing. We wanted to show you about it, and then at the very end in May, hopefully once all the projects have wrapped up or are wrapping up, the sites are going to come back together again and share with each other and do some of that, hopefully what Holly was talking about, doing some of that face-to-face sharing and learning from what each site did.
And Johanna and Vivian were at this particular workshop, and it was fascinating to watch Vivian's understanding, because she's sort of grown up with this model, and she was meeting, you know, sitting at a table with youth from White River Junction and saying, so what's your structure of your youth council? And the White River Junction kids were like, we don't have one. Like, you know, and she was like, do you have a, what did she call it, a presidio or something?
Yeah, so like a president and a subcommittee, and they were
it was interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And that exchange, and how are you going to get every voice, and you know, it was great. It was a great day. I think we're about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much